Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Okay, we're going to jump right in today because we are looking at some seriously fascinating source material. It's called Variations on a Theme: Shame, Love, and the Name David. Basically, we're going to discuss what these sources say about shame, love, and David by decoding the incredibly complex and, honestly, kind of heartbreaking ways that really high intelligence gets repurposed as cognitive armor. Seriously, if you have ever found yourself overthinking a feeling instead of just, actually feeling it, well, this explainer is going to be an absolute revelation for you.
Right off the bat, I want to start with this really profound realization from the text. Quote, "You can't out-architect a wound." I mean, wow, that quote just perfectly sets the existential stakes for everything we're looking at today. The core theme here is how we use our intellect, how we literally build these massive, super intricate mental structures just to hide from vulnerability. The sources argue that, sure, we can build as many glass observation decks and analytical frameworks as we want, but ultimately, all we're really doing is feeding the dark and pretending to call it rigor.
So let's get into Section 1, the architecture of defense.
So why do we build this massive mental architecture in the first place? Well, the text actually traces it back to early childhood trauma, specifically things like early abandonment or profound loss. Think about it. When a nervous system learns super early on that presence is provisional, that people can just vanish, it records that as a fundamental condition. And to survive that unbearable emotional reality, the mind has to convert it into a bearable cognitive one. Basically, it builds walls. To survive, the mind creates what the author clinically terms presence bankruptcy. Now, this is a condition where you physically occupy a space, but you completely withdraw your emotional attention just to avoid the risk of actually being reached. The protagonist of our source material, David, uses his brilliance to become an absolute virtuoso of attendance. The chair holds the shape of a person who's there, but his attention has already totally excused itself. It's like this anticipatory withdrawal, a way of leaving first so you can literally never be left. And to manage this emotional bankruptcy, we basically divide our internal geography into two zones. On one side, we have the library, and on the other, the kitchen. The library represents the totally safe intellectual world of theory and abstraction. It's this pristine space where you can examine everything without ever actually touching it. And of course, the doors are locked from the inside. But the kitchen? Well, the kitchen is the messy, unmediated reality of human connection. It is domestic, it's totally unpredictable, and you are completely exposed there. So the unspoken rule of the guarded heart is actually pretty simple. Be the library for everyone else, and never ever enter the kitchen yourself.
Moving on to Section 2, Meet the Guard Dog.
Okay, so how exactly does the ego protect this incredibly fragile architecture and keep everyone out of the kitchen? Well, the sources use this amazing recurring metaphor of a guard dog. Notice the little tin crown it's wearing? It tirelessly patrols the gates of intimacy, completely convinced it's performing this vital royal duty. And look at what it's guarding right there, just endless filing cabinets labeled miscellaneous. The guard dog's entire job is to take all those unanalyzed, messy, raw parts of our identity, the exact parts that actually allow for genuine human connection, by the way, and just file them away in the dark where no one can ever see them, all so the self is never found wanting.
But what is that guard dog actually so terrified of? Well, it comes down to this foundational difference that drives the ego to build these massive structures in the first place. The text puts it this way: guilt says I did something wrong. Shame says I am the wrong thing. So the fortress isn't built to hide a simple mistake. No, it is built to hide a foundational belief of inherent unworthiness. The intellect builds these crazy complex systems because it truly believes the core self is a fatal flaw that just has to be kept secret at all costs.
And to protect that dark secret, the ego develops these signature defense mechanisms. One of my favorites mentioned here is the load-bearing shrug. Just think of this as emotional Novocaine. It's his whole physical and verbal performance of complete indifference. The who cares or the big deal. But here's the catch. It's not that the person doesn't care. Actually, scratch that. They care enormously. They've just preemptively administered this shrug to protect themselves against the catastrophic pain the caring might actually cause.
Which brings us to Section 3, Variations on a Theme.
Now, the absolute true brilliance of this source material is how it takes this single wound of shame and examines it through these wildly different literary lenses. We're talking hard-boiled noir, Socratic dialogue, absurdist theater, Dzogchen Buddhist philosophy, mathematical calculus, and literally even children's fables. I mean, this wild, seemingly incompatible variety of genres isn't just some clever stylistic trick. It's showing us the absurd, exhaustive lengths our intellect will go to. It will literally analyze a single feeling in 10 completely different theoretical frameworks just to avoid actually feeling the feeling?
Let's just look at a few of these variations to see how this plays out.
In the Noir case file, the intellect acts like the cynical, hard-boiled detective running a one-man operation out of some gloomy, rain-slicked office. The realization here is that we are basically running a long detective con on ourselves. We spend decades hiding the terrifying truth that we are simply afraid of being loved. We end up arresting ourselves for a crime nobody but us ever even charged us with, and we use the whole detective act as a convenient alibi to avoid the real case.
And then, the text switches to a Socratic dialogue. Imagine love itself acting as Socrates, just relentlessly questioning David. Love asks, "Do you believe you did something wrong? Or do you believe you are something wrong?" Through this constant questioning cadence, the intellect is totally cornered. It's forced to see that it mistook its own fear for objective logic. It built an entire massive system around a foundation of shame, mistakenly believing it had actually reached a rational conclusion. No way, it was just fear all along.
All right, moving into section 4, the strange loop.
Okay, let's escalate the intellectual tension here a bit. The author actually brings in complex systems theory, specifically the logic of Douglas Hofstadter and Kurt Gödel, to break down shame into these precise, almost clinical steps. Step 1. The mind draws a distinction, an axiom stating that David is not lovable. Step 2. The guard dog is created as this super strict proof checker whose only job is to defend that axiom against any incoming love. Step 3. The mind becomes what's called a tangled hierarchy. It's kind of like an M.C. Escher drawing. You know, where the two hands are drawing each other? The ego creates this completely self-referential paradox that is literally impossible to solve from within its own rules.
So how in the world do you escape a loop you built yourself? Well, the truth is, you can't beat this paradox with a better argument. The system doesn't need to get smarter, right? It needs to step outside the loop entirely. When love finally stands at the door, it isn't offering some clever, better proof to the guard dog. It is standing one level up, in a totally unmarked, undefended state. And from that higher floor, the paradox doesn't even need to be solved. It just dissolves.
And when that finally happens, when the intellect finally sees right through its own elaborate armor, it doesn't result in this solemn, dramatic, tragic realization. No, it results in this: giggle, giggle, duh. I love that. It is the profound, completely deflationary laugh of the ego. It's the startling, almost helpless sound of a human mind realizing it just spent a lifetime building a massive machine for a door that was never even locked. The handle was on the inside the entire time.
Which brings us to our final part, section 5, stepping into the kitchen.
So the laughter fades, all those heavy theories just drop away, and we step directly back into ordinary reality. And the sources show us what it actually looks like to finally step into the kitchen. The author shares this totally real-life breakthrough, and guess what? It isn't some grand psychological triumph. It's just sitting on the floor with his daughter. His phone is left in the other room. There is absolutely no notebook around to take analytical notes. He lets her knock over a block tower, and he just sits there, letting his leg go numb, without turning the moment into literary material or some brilliant intellectual framework. He just exists, completely undefended.
Because ultimately we arrive at this absolutely vital takeaway from the text. Understanding doesn't cure angst. It just means the angst is literate. Man, think about that for a second. Analyzing our pain, writing 10 different brilliant literary variations about it, none of that actually heals it. It just makes the pain incredibly articulate. It literally just gives the ego another clever, comfy place to hide. Real healing requires abandoning the analysis altogether.
And we bring it all back right here to the actual meaning of the name David. The name literally translates to beloved. The source material uses this as a gorgeous metaphor for a fundamental truth we all possess, but for some reason, fiercely resist. The joke isn't that this grand name was wasted on someone unworthy. The much gentler joke is that we are named a truth long before we are ever ready to believe it. Love isn't some status we have to earn. It's literally the sky that our little fortress was built inside of all along.
So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a question to really chew on. What are you keeping locked away in your library while actual life is happening right out there in the kitchen? What brilliant frameworks have you built to avoid the messy, totally unpredictable vulnerability of being truly known? I don't know, maybe it's finally time to let the guard dog off duty, take off the little tin crown, and just go check the doorknob, because you might just find it's been unlocked this whole time.